Hello, everyone. Michael Shermer here for the Michael Shermer Show, brought to you by Wondrium. Wondrium is a series of college-level audio and video courses and documentaries produced and distributed by The Teaching Company. You know them, the Great Courses. Well, they've expanded because Wondrium brings you engaging educational content through short-form videos, long-form courses, tutorials, how-to lessons, travelogues, documentaries, and more, covering every topic you've ever wondered about and many you never thought you'd wondered about. You know, the known knowns and the unknown unknowns. Here's a bunch of content of unknown unknowns that you will soon discover. Here's what I'm thinking about taking that I was just scrolling through to see what's been popping up on my stream here on the app. It's a streaming service, so you subscribe for an annual plan. And by the way, if you subscribe through the podcast, you get a free trial plus a 20% discount off the annual plan. You just go to wondrium.com/Shermer to get it. I'll come back to that in a second. This is the course. It's Meaning of Life, Perspectives from the World's Great Intellectual Traditions. There are 36 lectures, so apparently this is an important topic. Yes, the meaning of life. In fact, the first lecture is called The Meaning of Life, and it goes through, well, let's see, the Bhagavad Gita, 1, 2, 3 lectures, Aristotle, 1, 2, 3 lectures on him. He gave a lot of thought to that. The Book of Job and Life's Challenges, what happens when things don't go so well, like for poor Job. Stoicism, Confucius, the Tao Te Ching, 3 lectures on that. The Buddha, 1, 2, and 3 lectures on that. Zen Buddhism, Hume and Kant and John Stuart Mill, Tolstoy and Nietzsche. I don't know if I could take 2 lectures on Nietzsche, but a couple on Gandhi and a couple on the Dalai Lama. And then at the end, so what is the meaning of life? I'm pretty sure it's not going to be 42 anyway. Just having fun with that because I love this company. I love these courses and I love just dropping in on these classes. I just listen to lectures now and then. If I really like the course, I'll take the whole thing. But usually I just listen to a half a dozen or so, and then I skip to another course. So you can do that with the subscription service. You can do it through your free trial. Go to wondrium.com/Shermer, wondrium.com/Shermer, Shermer. You get your free trial and 20% off the annual plan. So check it out. Why would you not? It's a fabulous, fabulous system. All right. Here's our next episode. We are live. Hi, everyone. It's Michael Shermer here for the Michael Shermer Show. My guest today needs no introduction, but I will introduce him anyway. He is Andrew Yang, the 2020 Democratic presidential candidate and a 2021 candidate for mayor of New York City. Named by President Obama as a presidential ambassador of global entrepreneurship, he's the founder of Humanity Forward and Venture for America. Yang's New York Times bestselling book, The War on Normal People, helped introduce the idea of universal basic income into the political mainstream. His new book is Forward, Notes on the Future of Our Democracy. I just finished listening to the audio edition, Andrew, and I love that you read it because that brings so much more life into the argument. So I don't know if you recall, you and I met in the green room at a theater in Montreal when Steven Pinker and I were doing a In Conversation, and I think you had just announced your candidacy. Do you recall that? I think that must have been 2019.
I do. I remember that. That was a good night. It was great to meet you and Stephen.
Yeah. So, Steve and I are, kind of push this idea of moral progress and material progress over the centuries. But of course, there's always short-term downturns. So let me read this little portion of your introduction of your new book, Forward. My second goal with this book is to lay out some of the forces that are holding us back. These forces go far beyond the broken economy I highlighted in my last book. We're witnessing a cascade of crises, from a pandemic to a punitive economy to police brutality to the selling of our attention and digital data to the highest bidders. Our democratic institutions are faltering right and left, and our systems are not designed for speed or significant change. Trust is fading. Democracy itself is losing legitimacy. Our political system is a fixed duopoly that will want to move slowly, if at all. Our leaders are rewarded, based not on solving problems, but on accruing resources and attaining office. Media companies have their own set of incentives that lead them to operate on a different wavelength from most of the American people. Local news is dying, and social media is driving our everyday discourse and our mental health to volatile extremes. These are all crises, and they're all linked in ways we will unpack in the pages ahead. Okay, so how do you square those? We have made a lot of material and moral progress over the centuries, and yet it does seem like everything you said there is true.
Yeah, what's funny, Michael, is I've laid out in my last two books relatively bleak prognoses for what lies ahead in American life. But most Americans are good if you just wander around the country, as I have over the last number of years. People are cordial and want good things for themselves and their families. So how to square that, as you say? And one of the things I lay out in my books is that we have several layers of perverse incentives that are pitting us against each other. As we're having this conversation, we are more polarized as a country than we ever have been. 42% of both Democrats and Republicans view the other side as corrupt and a threat to the country, which I'm going to suggest is a climate where you can do awful things and feel like they're justified. And that's because we have these political incentives that push legislators to the sides. They just need to placate or please 10% of the most extreme voters in their party to hold on to office. That's how you wind up with a 94% incumbent reelection rate, even though Congress's overall approval rate is something like 19%. But you're going to hang on to office as long as you stay in your camp. And then the media organizations further divide us into ideological camps. And then social media pours gasoline on the whole thing. So you have these massive forces in American life that are making us crazy, making us hate each other, making true governing next to impossible. But you still have, by and large, good people if you meet them face to face.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's one way to think about it is that it's not binary. There has been a lot of progress, and we have a lot of work still to do, which is the whole point of your work. Last night, I logged on to forwardparty.com and I joined. What did I join?
Oh, thank you, Michael. That's the best news I've heard all day.
What did I join? Will you be on the 2024 ballot as a party, and can I vote for your party?
What you joined is a democracy reform movement that's trying to transition us to a multi-party democracy. This two-party system is 160 years old and is decrepit and disintegrating underneath us. So the Forward Party is trying to transition us to a more modern, resilient, sustainable democracy. I will say my goal is not 3 parties. My goal is 4, 5, 6, 7 parties. That would be a sensible system. But the biggest leap is going to be going from 2 to 3 because, the duopoly does not like competition. So what you joined is a movement to try and get us from 2 to 3 so that we can have a more rational, sensible, functional system.
Yeah. My wife's from Germany. They have, I don't know, half a dozen parties there, and whoever wins, they have to make a coalition with the other parties because no one has a majority. That would be your goal, something like that.
Yeah, I think Germany does have 7 parties. And if you think about it, what's the reality in American life today? If you have one party succumb to terrible leadership, let's call him Donald Trump, then in a 2-party system, you can have that leader assume control of the entire government and make bad decisions. But if you have, let's say, the German system, if you have one terrible leader in one of the 7 parties, he doesn't run everything. I mean, this is one reason why it's so important what we're doing is that there are tens of millions of Americans right now who, if you give them a choice between Donald Trump and Democrat TBD, they're going to choose Donald Trump. But if they had a choice between, let's say, I don't know, a Mitt Romney-esque Republican or someone who is more moderate and Donald Trump, they would choose Romney. I mean, that's true of about 25 to 30% of Republicans. So we have to give people a chance to truly express their preferences. And if we do that, we'll wind up with more moderate, functional government as opposed to being whipsawed based upon what functionally really 10 to 15% of Americans want.
Right. So to get to even 3 or 4 parties, you have to get around this idea that if I vote for anybody but one of the 2, my vote is thrown away. So Ross Perot famously drew enough votes away from George H.W. Bush to throw it to Clinton, right? And then Ralph Nader may have drawn enough away. When was that? Well, he ran twice. Anyway, I just remember that scene where he appeared on Bill Maher's real-time show and Maher and Michael Moore got down on their knees and begged him not to run, even though they were pretty closely politically aligned with Ralph Nader, especially Michael Moore. And yet you just can't do it. You can't follow your principles.
Well, that's this false dysfunction of the duopoly, where if you just transitioned from our current plurality voting system to ranked choice voting, Nader can run, Perot can run. If you like Nader, you could rank him first and then the Democrat second, and no harm done. Now, the Democrats and the Republicans refuse to make this transition because they know if they had genuine competition, we wouldn't vote for them as much. I mean, the two parties have this in common, where they like to divvy up the country. 90% of the congressional districts in this country are uncompetitive, both blue and red. So if you give either party control of redistricting, they're going to draw on competitive lines because none of their people want to have a real race. And if you were to shift to ranked choice voting, then you get rid of the spoiler effect. And so when there are, let's say, for example, Democrats who scream bloody murder, saying like, oh, you're going to mess it up for the Dems or whatever, then you just say, look, just change to ranked choice voting. And then they actually don't respond in a rational way, which would be like, oh, that's great. That solves the problem. Let me look into that. Instead, they just continue shouting because that's the way they're trained. We're not trained to solve problems. The duopoly is completely made up. Nothing in the Constitution about it. Abraham Lincoln won in 1860 with 39.8% of the vote as essentially a third-party candidate, and that was the birth of the modern Republican Party. So the Republican Party replaced the Whigs and the Know-Nothings, and then you wound up with Republicans and Democrats who were ideologically not that dissimilar until 1964. When the Civil Rights Act of 64 was passed, the South flipped from Democrat to Republican, and then the two parties started to diverge ideologically. Then you got cable news in 1996 when MSNBC and Fox were originated. The death of the Fairness Doctrine was in like the mid to late 80s. And then you had Facebook and social media come in 2004. So then you wind up with this hyperpolarized environment that is just terrible, terrible design. The founders initially said we should not have a partisan system. John Adams called it a great evil across the land if you were to have two parties. George Washington famously warned against them in his farewell address. James Madison famously said you can't have factions that don't shift. So right now we're living through the greatest design flaw in the history of the world, Michael, and it threatens to doom us all. And what you've done by joining the Forward Party is you've raised your hand and said, hey, this system doesn't make any sense. Like you can look around the world and see systems that do make sense. So let's try and transition to one of those types of systems as soon as we can. And because of the stranglehold the duopoly has over everything, it's going to require millions of us getting up and saying, look, I'm going to create this middle lane. And the way to do that is just by changing the primary system so that you can vote for whomever you want. And I'm happy to say this has already happened in states around the country, and it's on the ballot in November. So this is a movement that's actually starting to work because more and more Americans like you are waking up and saying, the status quo is not the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, good. I will push that and try to get my followers to push that and get enough of us to do it. Two other issues that are hot button topics, gerrymandering and voter ID. Kind of walk us through what the manipulation behind the scenes of those systems are and what we can do to push back against that.
Yeah, so again, both sides gerrymander. Both sides really dislike having to run competitive races. And the saw, which is accurate, is that voters should choose politicians, not the other way around. But when you gerrymander, you're choosing voters. So each party, and recently in New York State, Michael, the Democrats overreached so badly that Democrat-appointed judges said this is unconstitutional, this map, and then they drew a new map that had several incumbents have to run against each other, and they screamed bloody murder. But the map that they drew was just so beyond the pale that even their own judges were like, that is not. So the problem right now is that gerrymandering is, or redistricting is typically in the hands of the state legislators. Now, the ideal approach is if you had a bipartisan or nonpartisan commission that was drawing these lines. That is not the case in the vast majority of states. So it's a challenge for us to go from here to there. I'm going to suggest that having something like the Forward Party could be instrumental because if you were to, for example, have a Secretary of State who's Forward Party, then they could be like, look, I'm going to certify this thing and I don't have a horse in the race myself. It's right now like having a referee with a team jersey on. Like you literally have Democratic Secretaries of State, Republican Secretaries of State. And like in this day and age, do we really trust that person to rule against their own team. So it's one reason why what we're doing is so important. But gerrymandering is a problem on both sides.
Right. So, one of the things I've always liked about you is your attitude. It seems pretty positive. You always seem like you're in a pretty good mood, and I can't imagine how you can possibly be, because when you run for office, everybody hates you on the other side, and half your own party hates you, and you just get a heap of hate thrown at you all the time. So the early chapters in your book, you talk about your childhood growing up and, some of the discrimination you experienced. I love the story about taking up basketball and you weren't too good at the start and they called you what they called it, the Chinese layup or something like that. And, jocks are just...
Yeah. When I miss a layup, they said that must have been a Chinese layup. Kids are mean.
Sports guys, athletes, they are just ruthless when they're trash talking. It is nasty. So maybe all the setbacks you had, and you also talk about, you graduated with a law degree, but you didn't like going into the law. Then you took up multiple entrepreneurship projects and they failed. Maybe it's good to have those kind of setbacks to develop a thicker skin.
Are you a parent, Michael?
I am. I have 2 kids, yeah. I have a 30-year-old daughter who lives in New York, and I have a 6-year-old son. That's quite a range.
Wow. Yeah, that is quite a range. I've got a 9 and a 6-year-old, both boys, and I see the way they're growing up, and it's so different from the way I grew up. I grew up in the 70s and 80s in a town in upstate New York, where I was one of the only Asian kids, so I got reminded of that fact a lot. And there were some tough times growing up, trying to figure out being comfortable in my town, or making friends, or trying to establish some kind of identity. And my parents, too, were immigrants to this country, so they didn't really have much of a way to guide my brother and me. But to your point, you can continue to progress and grow through some adversity. Certainly, I feel like my business setbacks really helped form me foundationally, where having companies fail in your 20s, I thought that I would never, ever, ever relinquish that feeling. Like how gutted you are when you put your heart and soul into something and it doesn't work out. And it really did a number on my confidence for months. And coming back from that, for years afterwards, I was like, well, it can't be as bad as that time my company failed. It just makes you more resilient. And then I had some success in the business world. I started a nonprofit called Venture for America that trained young entrepreneurs, because I wanted more people to have the same kind of entrepreneurial journey that I had, and have some mentorship and support and community. And it was only after running that nonprofit for 6 years, which involved working in the Midwest and the South extensively, that I decided to run for president, which was a very rash decision. But I was convinced that there was a case that needed to be made. And I thought, well, if I make this case and no one cares, I can live with myself. So to your point, I think having failed multiple times in my life made me capable of taking on challenges that might daunt others. Even now, I'm trying to start a major third party, which, by the way, everyone sees as, either very difficult or next to impossible. Though I know we're going to do it, because I've been through several of these journeys, and you can tell when the wind is at your back and everyone wants you to succeed. The truth is that 62% of Americans want an option from the two-party system. 50% plus are now independents. 58% don't want to vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump, who are, by the way, the most likely candidates that the major parties are going to put forward in 2024. I'm not talking about this last race. I'm talking about the next race. So in this environment, we're going to grow like mad, because so many Americans are going to look up and be like, wait, these cannot be our two choices. Combined age 159, kind of living emblems of the desiccation of our political system. They're going to look around and say, hey, give me anything else, and I will work for it.
Yeah, right. Where are the Adams and Jeffersons and Hamiltons and Lincolns and, just the really smart people? I guess maybe at this point it's such an unattractive career to go into. You're better off going into Wall Street or Silicon Valley, or just starting up your own company and just staying away from politics.
Yeah, that's the problem, Michael. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this resemble this, because, I have a very high regard for your audience. I think a lot of them are very, very bright. And circumspect and thoughtful. And I'm going to say they're probably too circumspect and thoughtful to actually run for office because it's so dumb and punishing. And I have many friends who resemble this, and I say, I get it totally. One of the things I say to them is like, look, like, let me take the slings and arrows and just support me. You don't have to stick your neck out. Though I did get a call from someone today who's so fed up, he's like, hey, I'm considering running. So there are different people who are trying to do more. But, again, if you have Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, there's no rational person who's like, these are like the first and second best choices to run the country. You know, I mean, in a country of 330 million, like there are a lot of very capable, competent, principled people. It's just that right now our system discourages those people from running for office.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a certain amount of resentment of wealth in the country. I'm not sure where the line is, but there's a sense that that's just making too much money, whatever that is. You know, if the CEO is paid 250 times the average worker's pay, that just feels wrong. Maybe if it was 20 times, that would feel right. John Mackey at Whole Foods famously put a cap at 19 times the CEO's pay over the average worker's pay. But I don't know where the number is. Your story is interesting to me because, somebody could look at you and go, well, look, you're a multimillionaire. You made all this money. And now you want to reform the economy after you've had yours. But in fact, you failed numerous times. So one of the reasons we want to reward people with a big payoff is that the failure rate is so high that they need to have that reward to take the risks. So how do you think about that in your context of your models?
Well, I think it's a tough time in American life, Michael, where you do have an economy that is what I call like very winner take all. It's kind of extreme. Some other people have called it the superstar economy, where if like you're really talented, you end up accruing a lot. As one example, about 35% of Americans graduate from college with a 4-year degree. So you're a country of 2/3 high school graduates for the most part. And so your question is, okay, do you need to be an outlier to succeed in American life at a high level? And if you do, is that sustainable? And one of the arguments I'd make is like, well, shoot, like you certainly don't want to have to make it so that like that's the reality. My last book was called The War on Normal People for this reason, is that I think we're squeezing everyday Americans more and more, and our political system's part of it. If you had a functional political system, you'd be doing more to try and make things more affordable or less unaffordable or less ridiculous for Americans. But at this point, the system is run by corporate interests who have very high levels of resources to get their way. So that leads to an environment where if someone has been successful, then everyone's like, fuck you, you're like a terrible person, and you're a product of like this malevolent rigged system. I have friends who are very successful. I have friends who are, not as successful. And one of the things that the Forward Party is about is like, look, we don't want to like demonize or villainize anyone. Like if someone's successful within the system, I'm going to say to you, it's probably not their fault the system is set up that way. They were just like running their race, as long as they're, like trying to do something positive, like it's fine. It's one of the things that, I said on the presidential debate stage, they were like, throwing rocks at Tom Steyer for being a billionaire. And I'm like, Tom Steyer's spending tens of millions of dollars trying to address climate change. Like, it's like, you really gonna like knock him for that? I mean, the system, ended up making it so that someone like him could have those resources. So we have to get everyone together. We have to get people who are on the outside looking in to say, look, I get it. This system's not very well designed for you and yours. And people who are doing very well in the system and be like, look, this is not sustainable. Like we have to try and make it so it makes sense for more people.
Yeah, when you wrote The War on Normal People, you talked a lot about automation, especially like self-driving cars. And it seemed like at the time it was right around the corner. And here we are 5 years later, and we're still 5 years away probably from self-driving cars. I have a Tesla. I love my Tesla. I love Elon Musk, but I don't see it. I think we're still 5 years away, and I think maybe always will be. I suspect it's a much harder problem than it seemed like at first. I like the self-driving mode, the kind of steering control and so forth when I'm on the freeway, left lane of the 405, just grinding along. Okay. But, like any other surface, regular surface roads, mountain roads and stuff, there's no way I would let it be automated like that. Do you think it's still coming, or are you a little more skeptical now?
Well, I tried to use that as an illustration in large part because it's something people could relate to. And being a trucker is the most common job in 29 states. So it's highly, highly relevant for hundreds of thousands of Americans. But the automation phenomenon writ large can apply in ways that are both obvious and inobvious to the most common occupations. So the most common occupations in America are customer service, including call centers, retail, food service and food prep, manufacturing, believe it or not, is still number 5, and truck driving and transportation is number 4. So if you look at those industries, you can see that we're going to automate a lot of the retail jobs. We're going to automate a lot of the call center jobs. Believe it or not, there's still over 2 million Americans in call centers making, about $16 an hour. And so if you ask yourself, well, will AI be able to do the jobs of those call center workers pretty soon? It's like, sure. You don't think of like a robot walking into a mall, but like the robots in the Amazon fulfillment center. So that's why the mall closes. Food service and food prep in some ways is more stubborn, but certainly some of the chains are investing in back of the house stuff, to some extent front of the house with self-service kiosks. And COVID has accelerated all that. Like a while ago, they might have been like, yeah, we'll just like, continue to have a person and pay them a little bit. But now they're like, screw it. Let's try and like lighten up the staffing in all of our places. So the trends are feeding into each other, manufacturing for sure. So even if you were to allow like, hey, truckers aren't going to get replaced anytime in the next number of years, like you're still looking at the same phenomenon economy wide. Again, 2/3 of Americans don't graduate from college. And so that's why I just listed the 5 most common industries that people work in, because where do high school graduates work? They work in the mall. They work in the food service industry. The 5 industries I just named employ about half of all American workers, to give you a sense of it. And these are what you think of as blue collar. I mean, if you look at white collar work, I mean, some of these AI engines can do basic prose writing. They can now spit out graphics and arts and designs. A lot of the insurance, customary calculation, accounting, bookkeeping, some basic legal work. I mean, heck, you used to have trader desks. Now it's been replaced by technicians and computer servers. So the trends are very real.
Right. You've encountered these counter arguments like, well, they used to worry about the elevator operator standing there pushing the buttons for the people using the elevator. Well, that got automated, and those people just found other jobs. So people will just find other things to do. And your rebuttal to that is what?
Well, right now the major red flag, Michael, is the labor force participation rate, which last I checked is something like 62%. And if you try and map what that means, I mean, you're looking at something like 1 out of 3 working age American men is not in the workforce. And a lot of those men wind up in really tough circumstances around substance abuse, self-destruction. I think it's driving our politics too, because if you have someone who's at home all day, and then they get on their computer and they go down an internet rabbit hole of conspiracy theory, and then they get radicalized, and then before you know it, they're meeting with a few other people in real life, like planning something terrible. So these trends are all tied together. I think that is the single biggest red flag for us all right now. Is like, look, like what proportion of Americans who are working age are actually in the workforce? And if you look at that 62 or so percent, it's one, anomalously low for developed countries. Last I checked, it's comparable to El Salvador or something like that. I mean, it's not where you want to be. And number 2, it's been trending negatively for quite some time. And it hasn't recovered to pre-COVID levels, as one example.
Right. When you first introduced the idea of UBI, I thought, well, the government can't just send everybody a check, can they? Well, apparently they can. We just went through 2 rounds of this, one under Trump and one under Biden, and everybody got a check. So obviously the government can do that. It's pretty good at that, actually. But then now we have inflation, and the economy is, kind of tanking. Are those related? I mean, I don't know enough about economics to know, but you hear some economists anyway talk about, well, if you just print money, you're going to get inflation.
The CARES Act was about $1.6 trillion. It turns out that the cash relief checks that were received by rank and file families, something like 16% of that total. If you do the math, like the relief checks they sent us was not $1.6 trillion. Like $1.6 trillion would be maybe 5,000 a head or something like that. They didn't send us 5,000 a head. So where did the other 84% of the money go? It went into banks, it went into airlines, it went into cruise ship operators, it went into the pipes, it went into companies. We really just tried to run around and make the corporate sector whole and protect them. And so that's where most of the money went. So you wind up with a system with tons of liquidity, and you end up with inflation in part because some of your supply chain, operations aren't sustaining. So even if you were to buy, it's like, look, we pumped liquidity into this economy, which I objectively agree that we have. Like, we've done it in a way that doesn't prioritize people, families. Like, the cash relief was a very small proportion of it. And now, unfortunately, a lot of that purchasing power is just getting eaten up by inflation on the daily by folks. So this to me is a product of the fact that we've had an easy money policy for, gosh, like now about 14 years. And we've been taking care of corporates pretty much the entire time. You and I are old enough to remember when the interest rates were like, 3, 4, 5%, and like there's actually like a cost of things, and that hasn't been the case since '08 at least.
Right. Well, yeah, interest rates. Well, in the 70s, to buy a house, that when I graduated from college and then started looking at, let's say, I was looking for homes in maybe the 80s, and interest rates were pretty high. So, but there are things the government can do along those lines, like adjust interest rates through the prime, and the Fed can make adjustments. And I was thinking about this with reparations as well. Short of just sending every African American a check or every Native American a check, could they not do something like the equivalent of the GI Bill, where everybody that served the country during World War II gets a free college education? Boom, we'll take care of that. You're not sending anybody checks. You're just giving them an opportunity to improve their economic standing and power and so forth. There's lots of things like the house I live in, I get to deduct the interest I pay on the mortgage. I'm married, so I get a marriage deduction. I have a kid, so I get a deduction for my kid, and so on. There's lots of things the government could do along those lines.
Oh, yeah. And we should be doing more. This is a very, very tough time, Michael. It makes me super sad because you've had a loose monetary policy for a long time. Inflation is now a raging problem. And so what you're going to have to do is what they did in the 70s, which is raise interest rates, which is going to have a negative effect on stock market prices and housing prices and asset prices generally, and just economic growth. So I don't see a way out of it. I talked to David Rubenstein, who was in the administration in the 70s, and they just had to, under Volcker, they just jacked up the interest rate over and over again to get inflation under control. I think it's a pick your poison situation, and I think they pick higher interest rates. So for anyone who's out there invested, it's one of these buckle up times, because I just don't see them having a choice. You can't have inflation running at these 8% levels indefinitely.
Yeah.
9%. I forgot the last reading was.
I think it was 9%. And the stock market, I haven't even checked today. I can barely stand to look. I have to look back to see where I was. My retirement account was 2 years ago when I was happy about my retirement account, to see where I am now. So that's worrying for sure. Again, I don't know how much more we can just print money or just. But yeah.
Well, so this is the tough part, is that we still have these problems that I would love to see addressed in the way you're describing, which is hey, let's sign people up for 2 years of national service. And if you sign up for 2 years of national service, we'll help you with your vocational training. We'll help you with your college debt or education. We'll do all these things. Because to me, the major problem is that you do have, 38% of Americans of working age, including tens of millions of men in particular. And I'm deeply concerned about men in particular, because the trends are so negative among men. Higher levels of behavioral problems, substance abuse. Only 40% of college students are men now. So if you think about what that means socially, it's very, very negative, and you have frankly, a media environment that just doesn't seem to view men or boys as terribly sympathetic figures. They're actually like the cause of problems as opposed to being the object of, like failing systems, which is the way I would look at it. So we should be investing massive amounts in increased vocational training, in national service, in my opinion. But you're entering a contractionary financial environment where everyone's going to look around and be like, like, hey, we've been doling out money for too long. It does make me very sad because, I think it's going to be a rough time.
Well, you and I both have graduate degrees.
I also want to say that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I also want to say that there was an enhanced child tax credit that was part of the relief bills. That was some of the best policy we'd had in generations. It lifted millions of poor kids and poor families out of poverty. Like that was exactly the kind of investment we should be making. Like work rates went up. It was so positive. All the data was really, really tremendous. And 240 economists signed a letter saying we should keep this going. Like everyone was like, this is the best thing we've done. And of course, Washington being what it is, they didn't renew it, and so it's been off since January.
Yeah. Well, there's a sense of elitism about a college degree, and you and I have graduate degrees. That's even more elitist. And yet, what's wrong with vocational school? What's wrong with having a trade? A lot of these trades pay pretty well, right? $100,000 a year as plumbers or whatever. What's wrong with that? And the answer is nothing.
HVAC repair, very hot field.
Which one?
Yeah, nothing's wrong with it. You have job security. Yeah, HVAC repair is a very, very hot field where they can't. I mean, a lot of these fields, they cannot find the people.
Right.
If you have a good work ethic and you go through a vocational training program and enter some of these fields, you will get paid six figures reliably. And there's a shortage of people doing it right now. Again, in my opinion, because of cultural messages that say like, hey, you got to go to college to have a good life. Oh, by the way, like the underemployment rate for college graduates is like 40%. So there really is a set of elite messaging that's failing the American people, Michael, and it makes me angry.
Right. I mean, there's a good case to be made for, getting a broad general education in the humanities, so you know how to think and you have cultural references to Shakespeare or whatever, but that's not going to get you a job. I mean, you can get that education on your own now. It's pretty readily available online through many sources, right? Could. At some point, you got to get a job.
Totally.
And again, I think the cultural norms have been, well, you have to go to college. Since World War II, that's been the shift. At Chapman University, where I teach, it's about 60-40 girls, boys. I look at a sea of women in my class. It's like, where are the guys? Wow, okay. And I saw this coming for years. Yeah, so let's talk about social media and the news media. You have several chapters on this that are close to my heart because we track this as well. Misinformation being spread through media. Now social media is a problem. What's the solution to that? The fairness doctrine, the Section 230 and all that stuff. Do you really want, I was just thinking, reading that chapter of yours, if they abandoned 230, overturned it or whatever, and Facebook could be sued, if I say something about you on my Facebook page that libels you and harms you, let's say I accuse Andrew Yang's an embezzler or something, and all of a sudden your fundraising dries up, you could sue me for libel, but could you also then sue Facebook for allowing me to post a libelous statement? And if so, wouldn't that just open the door? Wouldn't they be sued 1,000 times a day because they have so much money?
Yeah, I don't advocate for complete repeal of Section 230, which insulates the social media platforms from legal liability, though honestly, total repeal would probably be better than status quo. Like what I'd suggest is that we use it as leverage, where right now Facebook/Meta is a total black box and doesn't share any data with the public. And so you can say, look, we'll give you a liability shield if you share all of your data. We can see what's happening.
Yeah.
Share the algorithm. And then they have a choice to make and be like, wow, like I really like just being able to destroy democracy and destroy our kids' mental health without you knowing what I'm doing. And I sure do love this liability shield. It's worth, it's worth maybe given that they're $1 trillion company, it might be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So that then you have like a genuine, negotiation, exchange of value. And that's what the American people are owed for, at this point, years and years. Someone likened it, and I think this is pretty fair, that back in the day, in the 19th century, there were chemical manufacturing plants that just dumped chemicals in the river. And then eventually we figured out, hey, that actually ends up downstream and it hurts us, so stop doing that, and here's an agency, and let's keep you from dumping. Social media companies are at the same point right now. It's just that our government is too backwards and anachronistic and disincentivized and geriatric to understand what needs to be done. And so we're being torn apart, we're being pitted against each other, our democracy may not survive. But Zuckerberg, owns Maui or whatever the heck he owns. And I have nothing against people doing very, very well. But it shouldn't be at our expense. Eventually the social media companies have to be like, look, turns out just following the market to its logical extreme, not that great for kids, society, democracy.
You're talking about the social media effects on teenagers as the equivalent of being downstream from a chemical plant dumping chemicals into the river.
Yeah, I will make that comparison, sure. Yeah. If I had won the White House, Michael, I was going to go to war with Zuckerberg in particular. Really? I think he's because I was like, look, because Facebook, Barbara Walter, this political scientist, found a negative correlation between Facebook in particular and democratization around the world.
Right.
Like when you slide into autocracy, it's because Facebook is there.
Right.
and so, is that happening here? 100%. So, like this is our company. It's like an American company still. Even though I'm not sure at this point they even regard themselves as an American company. They have something like 2 billion users. But, I would go to war and say, look, first we're going to see to it that you're not destroying us, destroying our kids' mental health, destroying our sense of reality, destroying our democracy. Also, you can make a bit more money. And then we can examine whether, there are practices that need to be changed in other countries. But yeah, it would start here.
As an entrepreneur, why couldn't there be a market solution? That is to say, like parental regulation on how much you could let your kids watch or consume social media. But more importantly, why aren't there half a dozen competitive Facebook companies? Why doesn't Peter Thiel start the equivalent of Twitter and just knock them out of the park with their own company? Is it just kind of a market head start that they get, like a path dependency, like the QWERTY keyboard?
No, it's more fundamental than that, Michael. It's more fundamental. It's the same reason why you would not use the third best search engine, the third best navigation tool. Like these tech tools gravitate towards winner take all, and then they end up with better data, especially social media, because like the reason why no one goes on Truth Social is because no one's there. And so like, why the heck am I going to go there?
Right.
The reason why I am going to go like on Twitter is because everyone's there. So if I start a new social media company, like the moat is so vast, it may be uncrossable. The truth is that each of us wants only a few social media networks, one for our professional stuff, so that's LinkedIn, one for our kid photos, so that's Facebook, and then one for our intellectual meandering, so that's Twitter. And then you do wind up with like a couple for like kids' music videos, that's TikTok. So like, is there some innovation? Kind of. But Facebook then took Instagram off the market for $1 billion. So even when you do have a successful upstart, they just get absorbed by the behemoths. Should the U.S. had its shit together and stop that acquisition? Probably. WhatsApp, similar story. So if you look at the market dynamics, you'll wind up with a few mega winners. Look at like Amazon and retail. Can you imagine someone coming up and being like, I'm going to like compete in retail? I actually know the guy who did that twice, like Mark Lowry with diapers.com and jet.com. And, jet.com ended up getting bought by Walmart because Walmart has to take on the unenviable, impossible task of challenging Amazon. So they were like, all right, like, but the markets will just end up with winner take all. And so if you wait for a market solution, you wait forever.
Right. So you're going to end up with something like that in cable news. You have Fox News on the one side and MSNBC/CNN on the other. We have something like a duopoly and they're just unwatchable now. I mean, I just could, it's something I study, and I know that half the things they say on there are just not true. They're just saying them to polarize people because that generates more income and higher ratings for them. And they have those rating services now.
Yeah. National media is very, very polarized.
Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
that New York Times analysis of Tucker Carlson, where that show uses, I guess, minute by minute ratings, so he can tell if I use these words, faith, family, Reagan, I'm gonna get a bump here, or they hate you and they want to do this, kind of conspiratorial mindset. Again, the ratings go up.
Yeah, these are market actors, and so both media companies and social media companies benefit from our polarization, from our anger, from our fear. If I put out very sedate, thoughtful news, no one watches it, and so I go out of business, or I get with a program and start launching rhetorical attacks. And so this is, and you read my book, so this is the major point I'm making in Forward, is that, look, this polarization is driven by incentives, and the incentives are very powerful, and they're going to get more powerful over time, not less powerful. There are very few ways out of this mess. The way that I've proposed and I'm now championing, with your help now, which I'm super grateful for, is it starts with an independent political movement that can say, look, 58% of us are somewhere in the middle, so let's try and break free of this stuff. And then the next step will be a media company that targets the same folks. I dare say that you'd be tremendous in that sort of role. It's like, we just put out thoughtful, independent stuff that's not like just partisan hackery all the time. And then a whole slew of social media influencers. Like, if you look at the two parties, they have, I don't know, like, I would say several $billion in media infrastructure on both sides, easily. So for Forward, for this third party movement, we're going to need to build our own. And there are individual voices out there that are essentially doing this work right now. So it could be that we team up or band people together. But as an entrepreneur and builder, I'm enjoying this challenge because I see it as so mission critical. I mean, you and millions of other Americans look up and be like, how did it get this bad? Why is this news so terrible and polarized and polarizing? Why are these two parties offering me such terrible choices? So it's like a very, very fertile area for us to offer a better choice, a better option.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the psychology of politicians and their followers, supporters, because you're an insider, and you look at somebody like Trump, who is really not conservative, and I just asked my conservative friends, why are you voting for this guy? I mean, he especially if you're a Christian conservative, this is like the worst candidate ever on that side. And the answer seems to be, well, he's going to get us the judges we need to overturn Roe v. Wade, or, it's a stand-in. The person's a proxy for something else that people believe. What happened to Kansas? Well, maybe people are not voting for their own economic benefits personally. Maybe they're voting for some other moral value. You talk about Jonathan Haidt's research in your book about the emphasis on fairness and care, harm care, fairness and justice, whereas people on the right tend to emphasize faith, family, flag, authoritarian, the respect for authority, sanctity, that kind of thing. So maybe people are voting based on something else deeper in our psychology.
Oh, they're voting on values and moral messages. And Jonathan Haidt, who's a friend and has influenced me greatly, describes 6 universal moral values. And conservatives appeal to loyalty, authority, and sanctity, which the majority of Americans actually respond to. Then you have liberty, which the two sides interpret differently. And then on the left, you have caring and fairness. So Jonathan postulates, and I agree with him because he's smarter than me, is that the conservative messaging works on slightly more people than the liberal messaging. And it's why, for example, Fox's ratings are about twice as high as MSNBC's ratings, as an example in my book. So when you try and understand the Trump candidate, it only makes sense if you realize that he's just communicating on basic values and feelings And he still has this entire like anti-elite, drain the swamp, anti-establishment energy, where if like the media criticize him or some like smart guy like criticize him, then they're just like, it's just like the machine trying to keep him down. So that there is this need he's responding to and elevating. And I mean, people probably know, like, I'm no Trump fan, and like I'll do anything I can to keep him out of office the second time. I tried to get him out the first time, obviously by running. But we should not underestimate his appeal. I mean, his appeal is very, very deep.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're recording this on May 25th, so it's the day after that mass shooting at that grade school in Texas, 19 children dead. Is there any hope for gun control legislation that will make a difference, do you think? But back to the psychology part, why do conservatives who claim they're pro-life, here I'll channel George Carlin, right? They're pro-life from conception to birth, and after that, you're on your own. Why don't they care about the vulnerable children that could be shot dead? And we could do something about it with meaningful gun control legislation, but they don't go for that. They block that. Why is that?
I think it's because of their political incentives, Michael, and this takes us full circle. If I'm a Republican legislator, I have a 94% win rate as long as I don't cross my party leadership. And the reason why my win rate is so high is that I have to go through a party primary, the Republican primary, but then if I get through that primary, the general election is uncompetitive. It's already a fait accompli in 90% of districts. So the calculation for an individual Republican is like, if I compromise on gun safety legislation, the odds are I lose my job the next time I'm up, because among the 10% of people who actually will determine if I come back, a lot of them are going to want to get rid of me if I'm not like super pro Second Amendment rights in their determination. So if we're waiting for them to do the right thing, it's not going to happen unless we change the incentives. And so if you were to change the incentives to, let's say, open primaries, where instead of having to get through the 10% most extreme Republican voters, they have to take their case to the entire district, then all of a sudden you would see them become much more reasonable on gun safety rules, because it turns out the general public is like fairly unified on having reasonable gun safety rules. So this is the case I'm making to folks, is like, look, asking Republicans to vote themselves out of office will not happen. The only thing we can do is actually change the incentives so they don't have to go through a primary anymore, and then you would see more compromise and reason. I will say too, though, Michael, that in this case, I mean, this country already has over 300 million firearms out and about. It's almost one for every man, woman, and child. So we shouldn't fool ourselves that if you had some kind of reasonable gun safety laws, that it would solve the problem. Like the problem's going to persist.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm really discouraged about it, because even if you banned all production of all guns today and no one could buy another gun, of course, that's not going to happen. But even if you did, there's still 300 million guns floating around you could buy on the black market. Short of just going door to door and just confiscating everybody's guns, that would be a disaster. This would be like Waco and Ruby Ridge every day of the year. Right. So I don't know. It's almost like this is something we're just going to have to live with. I did a series of debates with John Lott. Do you know John Lott, the guy who wrote the book More Guns, Less Crime? Right. His thesis, basically simplifying, is, just arm everybody and let God sort it out later. Right. Just, the criminals will have a harder time if everybody's armed and they know they're going to get shot. So just arm everybody. And, so in some of these debates we did, the feeling I got from the audience is that the gun represents something else deeper. It's a proxy for, kind of individual autonomy and freedom and liberty and self-protect. Yes. And when I said, it's 30,000 a year dying by guns, same as automobiles. What if it was 300,000 a year? The answer was, well, we don't care. We want our guns. Doesn't matter how many die.
Yeah, that's right. It is a values argument. It's not a fact-based argument. So, we have to try and reach the people we can reach, change the incentives, but it's going to be with us and persistent because of how many guns there are in this country.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like the abortion issue that didn't used to be a big Republican thing until the 80s, right? The moral majority basically told Reagan, we can get you in the White House if you become pro-life, because he was pro-choice before that. And then by the 90s, that was a huge polarizing issue for conservatives. You had to be pro-life.
Yeah, there used to be pro-life Democrats. I'd imagine there were probably some pro-choice Republicans, and then it became more of a litmus test, which is unfortunate. The numbers show that most Americans are for some reasonable approach that allows women to be able to make their own determination, with some limitations in terms of the third trimester and some other things. I mean, I think that's where most Americans are. Again, it's a function of this polarization, really. Like the two-party system distorts everything. Michael, I'm going to suggest to everyone listening to this that if we had a 7-party German system, you probably see like some kind of middle ground approach on a lot of these issues.
Yeah. Okay, let's get there. All right. We will provide the link for people to join and donate to your party. I hope you get there by 2024.
Join the Forward Party.
The Forward Party. But just give us...
Let's go. And as you can tell, what Michael said before, I am like an optimistic can-do guy. It's like, let's solve these problems. I mean, there's so many of us. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, the majority of Americans think that abortion should be legal in at least the first trimester and into the second trimester. So why don't we do what the majority of people want? This is a democracy, right? The other part I wanted to ask you about in your book, because I loved it so much, is that the people that you met that are actual professional politicians in the Democratic Party anyway, that you got to know, your impression I gathered was that these are really good people. Most of them really want to do the right thing, and they're nice people. We have such negative opinions about politicians because of the polarization. But just talk about that a little bit.
The main emotion I feel for politicians is sympathy, because I feel like they're stuck in a system, and many of them showed up trying to do something good, and then they get put in a situation where they have to talk themselves into like, okay, if I do these 8 things, then maybe I can do these 2 things that I'm actually happy about and proud of over here with like 10% of my time. It's like the machine has overtaken our elected officials in a huge way. And some of the folks I talk to, though, like even they'll say like, hey, if you could help fix this, I'd be thrilled. They're captive. It's easy to turn on everyone. Like, some politicians don't run for the right reasons. Some are, not nice people. But a lot of them are fine, like good people. Some of them are even excellent, I will say. So it's one of those things, Michael, that where the truth is never that black or white. You know what I mean? It's like, are they all like amazing people? Not necessarily. Are they all like terrible people? Like, no. It's like they're like people. Like some are great, some not so good. But the primary emotion I feel for them is like I want to try and liberate you to do good things if that's what you want to do. if you're not here to do that, then less so. But if you're here to do something good, then like I'd like you to be able to do it.
Just a couple other points in your book. Term limits. Again, how do you impose term limits on people that are going to vote to overturn term limits because they want to keep their job going?
Well, 74% of Americans are for term limits, and I have a clever way that we can get it voted in, Michael. And this is a plank for the Forward Party. So if you like term limits, this is the place for you. I can tell you the arguments for term limits too. I mean, one thing is that it'll encourage some dynamism and less of the gerontocracy. It'll align your interests in various ways. I mean, 3 out of 4 of us want this. Whenever I talked about term limits on the trail, everyone just started applauding. So here's the clever way you can pass it. You say, let's impose 18-year term limits per house, pretty long time, but it doesn't apply to the folks who are currently in office. It just applies to anyone who comes in after you. And so if you're them, you're like, wait a minute, like, no skin on my back. But eventually that class would age out, and then you'd wind up with like a higher degree of dynamism that would better reflect popular will.
Right. Okay, data as property rights and your whole chapter on data protection. How do you think about that?
Yeah, our data right now is being sold and resold for over $200 billion a year by the big tech companies. We're not seeing a dime. It's making us crazy. It's turning us into rats in a maze. So you could take a regulatory approach, which, again, as you can tell, like I think the government should be more assertive in this realm. But you can also have a collective market type approach where you have data unions, and the data union can be your data cop on your behalf. It can get you half the money that the tech companies are making out of you, because like no one wants to spend their lives trying to figure out what these tech companies are doing with your data. So if we had a data union, then you could join it and then just set your preferences, and then they could send you checks. So I'm actually working on ways to make this happen right now. Started something called the Data Dividend Project that's trying to organize people, and I'm working with an EU company that's trying to make the tools for data unions, because the EU actually has better rules than the US does. By 2024, you're going to be able to own your data over there. And so I'm going to ask anyone listening to this is like, why do they have these data rights and Americans don't? I mean, like eventually Americans will be like, wait a minute, what's happening? The tech companies are expert in making it so we don't talk about this stuff, but it's much more fundamental than most people realize.
Mm-hmm. And would your Department of Technology address that problem? Is that what your purpose of that is?
Yeah, that's what I was hoping to do. I mean, I still want to do it. This is one of the fundamental struggles of our time, is that like tech has usurped human agency and autonomy, and our social ties and well-being. So it's time to get it under control. And like I'm in my 40s. Like I remember the time before big tech, and I know what it's like now. Most of our leaders don't understand what the heck is going on this side.
Yeah. Okay, money in politics. How much does it take to become president? Biden raised $1 billion, Trump raised 800 million or something like that. Just seems just ridiculous. How do you get control of that?
Ideally, you would wash the system out with people-powered money, where you give everyone 100 democracy dollars, and then you can just do whatever you want with it. And then you'd wind up with, let's do some math on that for a second. Like billions of dollars, even if a fraction of people used it, that could wash out some of the other influence. I'd also overturn Citizens United, which is the unlimited corporate money in politics. And you're not going to all believe it, but there's actually an organization trying to do that, state by state. They're going state by state saying, hey, you want to overturn Citizens United? And it turns out that something like 75% of both Americans and states want to. So, it's called American Promise, if that sounds appealing to you. As you can tell, Michael, I'm actually trying to work on solving these problems.
I know.
It's like, and the fun thing is that other people that are working on these problems like come to me and be like, hey, you seem to want to help. And I'm like, yes, I do.
Yeah, again, I'm always pounding on conservatives here and their inconsistency. They say, well, they supported Citizens United. They support capitalism, free market, big corporations, keep your government hands off our corporations, and so on. And now here's Ron DeSantis going after Disney and using the power of the state, state of Florida, to, make trouble for Disney because Disney went woke, right? Because they support LGBTQ rights and so on. And that whole controversy. Again, why the inconsistency there?
Well, I mean, I can't speak to that one. But, I think the fundamental problem is that popular will is getting drowned out to a very high degree. And just like our lives are run by the almighty dollar. So whoever can make the most money off of us gets their way. And then you wind up with some real negative effects. So what the heck is the counter to that? Like, I love nonprofits. I love entrepreneurship. I love building things, but there are certain things that you kind of want, like a functional public sector or actor. And this reminds me of the big tech argument. It's like, why don't parents just do this? It's like, I'm a parent. You're a parent. Like, trying to protect our kids from some of these big tech companies is just an impossible task. I mean, you have like $1 trillion companies that are employing, frankly, some of the smartest people in the world to try and like maximize engagement. And then who do you have on the other side? Like overworked parents who, like who's going to win that one?
Right. Well, Andrew, I know you have other interviews lined up this morning. You're a busy guy. You actually have a real job, unlike me. So, but just take 2 minutes and tell us, what's it like to walk out on that stage and there's 12 other famous candidates and the cameras and the lights and the audience. That must have been pretty exciting.
Well, In order to get there, Michael, I needed to get, let's call it like, 80, 100, 200,000 Americans to donate some of their hard-earned money, to get me on successive stages. So there was that sense the entire time that I was like carrying with me the hopes and aspirations of a lot of people. And yeah, like it was very special. It was very invigorating. I haven't stopped. It's like it's a different time. It's a different process. But one of the things that happened to me was that I realized that I'm one of like, you can pick a number, but I'm like one of like the top, whatever it is, 50, 100, like Americans who might be able to improve things for people. And so that's what it felt like on the stage. It's like, wow, like people fought to get me here.
Yeah.
And so if it went well, then I felt like I, came through for them. If it didn't go well, I felt like I let them down. So there's a lot of responsibility, a lot of obligation. But it was a blast in some ways. I'll tell you, like on a personal level, my wife was watching one of the first debates, and then she saw me get introduced and saw like, the big video image of me on the back or whatever. And she turned to our friends and said, "I cannot believe I'm married to that guy."
That's pretty cool, actually. That's going to make you feel good.
Well, it's just because it's so weird because she sees me, and then all of a sudden I'm like, bye, I'm going off to this thing. And then it's like,
oh my God, there he is on the...
She ended up coming to the debates.
He's on the Jumbotron.
She ended up coming to the debates later. She didn't come to the first debate, but she came to the other debates later.
Right. Yeah, your kids' friends must think it, oh my God, I've seen that guy on TV. That must be a lot of fun. Right. So do you know what you're going to do in 2024? Do you know if you'll run, if your party gets on the ticket, or what your plans are?
Well, we're going to do everything we can to help to provide a third option, Michael. I just want to be of service. If that's supporting another candidate, great. If it's in some other capacity, it's great. Like, I have an open mind about it. I'm certainly not someone who just has some like burning desire to like, like hold a particular office. Like, I just want to help people. And the single best way I can help right now is by giving people a genuine alternative to this decrepit two-party system that threatens to destroy us, truly. So if you want to help with that, just go to forwardparty.com. We have chapters in just about every state. We have fun events coming up. And the biggest thing, too, is that the people are awesome. We want to be an antidote to the politics of despair, of negativity, of hate, of anger. Like, we want to actually uplift you on the way to making the real change that Americans have been waiting for generations, but the time is now.
Yep. I'm there with you. If we can do it without taking votes away and tipping the election to one party or the other, that it's a genuine third party. I mean, I voted Libertarian in my past, but they never get anywhere, and it just seems so frustrating. So then I feel like, well, I got to hold my nose and vote for this one or that one. So, genuine forward third party on the ticket would be fabulous. I'd love to see that. We will do what we can. We will provide the link, forwardparty.com. Go there and join up and make a donation. All right. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Michael. I will see you soon.
Yep, very good. On to your next interview. Keep going.
Not left or right, but
That's
forward.
right.
That's
forward.
where we're going to take the country, my friend.
I love that. All right. Talk to you later.